Hello again. This week we'll be reading chapters 13 and 14 out of your I Am Malala book. If you haven't already, pull up the quiz from your Infinite Campus, and as we read, I will stop at each question. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. Chapter 13, Class Dismissed. Ever since I'd started doing interviews, people in Mingora sometimes came up to me and told me I had done well. But many of my mother's friends were scandalized that I had shown my face on TV. Some even said that she would go to hell for not raising me better. And although my mother never said anything to me, I knew she would probably have preferred that I had worn a veil. But even if my mother disagreed with my choice, and even if her friends criticized her, she stood behind me. Meanwhile, even some of my friends asked why I let the world see my face. Lula's men wear masks, I said, because they are criminals. But I have nothing to hide, and I have done nothing wrong. I'm proud to be a voice speaking out for girls' education. I'm proud to show my identity. So question number 1. Why does Malala not wear a mask when she is doing interviews? Why does Malala choose not to wear a mask? Why does she say? A madman was about to kick more than 50,000 girls out of school in a matter of days, and all people seemed to want to talk about was whether I should have worn a veil. Meanwhile, my brother Kushal was saying that for once he wished he were a girl so he didn't have to go to school. I wondered sometimes if the world had turned upside down. My mother and father liked to watch my interviews, but I usually ran out of the room when they came on TV. I always liked to give interviews because I knew how important it was to speak for girls' rights, but I never liked to watch them. I don't know why. It was fine for the whole world to see me. I just didn't want to see myself. So question number 2. What did Malala not like to watch on TV? What did Malala not like to watch on TV? And I suppose I have to admit that I'm a lot like all those people who were so preoccupied with my appearance. I suddenly noticed all kinds of things about my looks, things that had never bothered me before. My skin was too dark, my eyebrows were too thick, one of my eyes was smaller than the other, and I hated the little moles that dotted my cheek. A couple of days before the official school closing, my father was going to Peshawar to meet 2 video journalists from the New York Times. I went with him. They had invited my father to ask if they could follow him on the last day of school. But at the end of the meeting, one of them turned to me and asked, "What would you do if there comes a day when you can't go back to your valley and school?" Because I was both stubborn and full of hope, I replied, "That will not happen." He insisted it might, and I started to weep. I think it was then that they decided to focus their documentary on me as well. The morning of our last day at school, a 2-man camera crew appeared at my house. I was still sleeping when they arrived. They told my father they were there to document my day, from start to finish. He was surprised. He had agreed to cameras in his school, not his home. I heard him try to talk the reporter out of this idea. Eventually he gave in and the filming began. "They cannot stop me. I will get my education," I told the cameraman. "If it is in home, school, or any place, this is our request to the world. Save our schools, save our Pakistan, save our SWAT." So, next question. What does Malala tell the cameraman? What does Malala tell the cameraman? With that, we'll keep going. I sounded hopeful, but in my heart I was worried. As my father looked at me, smiling uncomfortably with a mixture of pride and sadness for his daughter, I pictured myself, stuck at home, reading whatever books I could find until I ran out of books. I was 11 years old. Was my schooling really going to end now? Was I going to end up like the girls who quit school to cook and clean? What I didn't know was that my words would reach many ears, some in distant parts of the world, some right in SWAT, in the Taliban strongholds. Later, as my friends and I passed through the school gate, and the video camera recorded our every move, it felt as if we were going to a funeral. Our dreams were dying. 2/3 of the students stayed home that day, even though we'd all vowed to be there for the last day. Then one of the girls burst through the doors. Her father and brothers had forbidden her from going to school, but as soon as they left for the day, she snuck out. What a strange world it was when a girl who wanted to go to school had to defy militants with machine guns, as well as her own family. As the day went on, the teachers tried to act as if everything were normal. Some even gave us homework as if they'd be seeing us after the winter vacation. Finally, the bell rang for the last time, and Madam Miriam announced it was the end of the term. But unlike in other years, no date was announced for the start of the next term. My friends and I all stood in the courtyard, hugging one another, too sad to leave. Then we all made a decision. We would make our last day our best. We stayed late just to make it as long as possible. We went over to the elementary school building where we'd all started as children and played the games we played when we were little. Mango Mango, Hopscotch, Peppertoonie. We played silly games, sang nonsense rhymes, and pretended that, at least for those few hours, there was no Taliban. So, question number 4. What did Malala and her friends do after school had ended? What did they do after school ended? Answer that and we'll keep going. Unfortunately, on that day, Maniba was not talking to me because we'd had a fight a few days earlier. When I got home, I cried and cried. My mother cried too. But when my father came home, he said, "Don't worry, Johnny. You will go to school." But he was worried. The boys' school would reopen after the winter holiday, but the closing of the girls' school meant a significant loss of income, which he needed to pay teachers their salaries and the rents for the buildings. As usual, many of the families were behind in their tuition payments, and others had stopped paying when Fazlullah issued his edict. My father had spent the last few days before the holiday trying to find a way to pay the rents, the utility bills, and the teachers' salaries. That night, the air was full of artillery fire, and I woke up 3 times. The next morning, my family and I talked half-heartedly about leaving SWAT or about sending me to a boarding school far away. But as my father said, SWAT was our home. We would stand by her in this time of trouble. Chapter 14. Secret School. My father wanted me to continue to improve my English, so he encouraged me to watch a DVD that one of the journalists in Islamabad had given me, a TV program called Ugly Betty. So, question number 5. What TV program did Malala like to watch? What TV program did Malala like to watch? I loved Betty, with her big braces and her big heart. I was in awe watching her and her friends as they walked freely down the streets of New York, with no veils covering their faces, and no need for men to accompany them. My favorite part, though, was seeing Betty's father cook for her instead of vice versa. But I learned another lesson watching the show. Although Betty and her friends had certain rights, women in the United States were still not completely equal. Their images were used to sell things. In some ways, I decided women are showpieces in American society, too. Question 6. Why does Malala think that women in the United States are not completely equal? Why does Malala think that women in the United States are not completely equal? So answer that and we'll keep going. When I watched, I looked at their hems cut so short and their necklines so low. I wondered if there was a clothing shortage in the United States. How crazy it was that this little plastic disc with images of a girl in big glasses and shiny braces was illegal. And how odd, too, to watch as Ugly Betty and her friends were free to walk the streets of New York City, while we were trapped inside with nothing to do. Another show I was given was a British comedy from the 1970s. It's called Mind Your Language, and about a classroom full of adults from all over the world trying to learn English. Madam Miriam gave it to my father, but I watched it, and it made me laugh and laugh. It's not good for learning English, though, because everyone on the show speaks it so poorly. But that's where I learned some of my favorite sayings, like jolly good, okay, and excuse me, and that's alright. That's alright. So, question 7. What are some of Malala's favorite sayings from the show? I'll let you answer that one and we'll keep going. Meanwhile, my little brother Atal and his friends had started playing a new game. Instead of playing Peppertoonie, he and his friends were playing Army versus Taliban. Children all over our neighborhood made pretend weapons out of whatever they could find. They fashioned guns out of sticks and folded paper, and grenades out of old water bottles. War and terrorism had become child's play. Sometimes my own little brothers, unaware of what it really meant, would pretend to be Taliban militants or army soldiers. They even set up bunkers on our roof where they acted out a battle. One day I saw Atal in the backyard, furiously digging a hole. "What are you doing?" I asked. I shuddered when he gave me his answer in the most normal tone of voice. "Making a grave," he said. All the while, I I kept up my blog posts as Gul Mackay, 4 days after all girls' schools were shut down, whilst Lula's men destroyed 5 more schools. I am quite surprised, I wrote. These schools had already been closed. Why did they also need to be destroyed? Meanwhile, the army was doing nothing about it but looking busy. Soldiers sat in their bunkers, smoking cigarettes, shelling all day, and firing cannons at the hills all night long. But in the mornings, the news would come, not that the army had gained ground, but that the Taliban had slaughtered 2 or 3 people. The people of Swat continued going to watch the floggings, announced on Radio Mullah, and girls who only wanted to learn were trapped inside homes that had become like jails. So, what does Malala refer to her home as? Question number 8. What does Malala refer to her home as? Answer that and we'll finish up the chapter. During those dark, dull days, we heard rumblings about secret talks with the Taliban. Then out of nowhere, Fazlullah agreed to lift the ban on elementary schools for girls. It was all right for little girls to go to school, he said, but he still insisted that girls over 10 should stay home in Purta. I was 11, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. Besides, I could easily pass as a 10-year-old. Madame Miriam sent out a message to all the girls in the upper school. If they wanted to defy this new edict, she would open the school doors. Just don't wear your uniform, she said. Dress in everyday clothes, plain shalwar kameez. That won't attract attention. So the next day I put on everyday clothes and left home with my books hidden under my shawl and my head held high. But Mingora had changed while school was closed for that month. Now the streets were ghostly quiet. Stores were shuttered, houses were dark, and even the normal din of traffic was a mere murmur. More than a third of the population had fled. My friends and I were a little bit scared as we made our way to school on that first forbidden day. But we had a plan. If a Talib stopped us, we would just say, "We are in grade 4. When I got to school that morning, I was more elated than ever to walk through the gate. Madame Miriam was waiting there for us, giving each girl a hug and telling us we were brave. She was brave too, of course. She was taking a big risk being there. Girls like us might be reprimanded. A grown woman could be beaten or killed. This is secret school, she said. This is our silent protest." So last question. What did Madame Miriam say their school was? What did Madame Miriam say their school was? So once you answer that question, we are done reading for this week. So you can go ahead and submit your quiz, and I will see you all next week. Bye.